All right, I have to start this time together with a bit of an apology, or at least an explanation. I had a lot of the material for this presentation already quite a while ago, but I ran into a lot of computer problems, and so even the material that I had was very, very hard for me to get down and put onto the presentation. And eventually I had to scrap a lot of the really nice images that I had and replace them with images which weren't quite as fine because the good images were too thick. They were too big to be able to forward. So I ended up taking a bunch of pictures with a much kind of cheaper camera, but at least they had the good quality of being easier to send back and forth, because I had to move it from one computer to another. So that was a bit of a holdup, and but fortunately, John Bailey was very patient and very helpful, and was able to catch a number of the mistakes. Not in addition to the mistakes I made, there was mistakes that the computer itself was making. They would send the pictures out of order, but John was able to figure that one out. So, so that's my excuse. And that's why we're starting a little bit late. So, so I was asked to do a presentation on the symbolism that you see in Buddhism, specifically in Tibetan Buddhism, though most of the things that we'll be talking about, the vast majority of it is applicable for many other forms of Buddhism as well. And I wanted to mention, actually, this already came up in the comments that some people were trading back and forth before this session actually began, talking about what we found attractive in the Buddhist teachings that we may not have seen very much in other religions to which we had been exposed. And one of them was the just the good humor of the main people who were involved, from the Dalai Lama on down, and especially in my own situation, and for the person who was the artist in the book Buddhism for Dummies, from which a lot of these illustrations come. His name is Andy Weber, and both Andy and I, our main source of inspiration and a main source of laughter as well was our root guru, Lama Yeshe, who founded the FBMT together with Kebje Zopa Rinpoche many years ago. So maybe, John, we could have the first image now. Oh, there he is. So this is a picture of Lama Yeshe. I think many of you, even those who might not have met him in person, you've probably read and heard a lot of things about him. And in this picture, one of the reasons I chose this, though there's thousands of other pictures we could have chosen, and any of you who have seen a copy of Big Love, published by the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives, is filled with scores and scores of photos of Lama, and in it you can see his very kind, his happy, his vibrant nature in those pictures. But what this picture shows is that he's holding two implements. In his right hand, he's holding a vajra, or the Tibetans call it a dorje, which is a power symbol, symbolic, indicating the power of compassion. And in his left hand, in his lap, he's holding a bell. And these two implements are very, very often seen together and used together in different Buddhist ceremonies. So the Vajra, which is a power symbol, stands for the power of compassion. And the bell stands for wisdom. And this combination of compassionate method in the right hand and the wisdom of the bell of insight in the left hand, these are the two branches of the Mahayana path leading to full enlightenment. And these images come up in various forms and in various contexts throughout the Mahayana and especially the Vajrayana teachings. So I wanted to start with Lama because without him, none of this work on the book or the pictures would ever have been done, because as I mentioned, he was so much the source of our inspiration, and not just in how he taught, though he was an excellent teacher, but just the way he was, just his very being. But I shouldn't get into this too much, because if I do start to speak about Lama, the whole hour and a half will go by just with stories about him. So maybe I should switch to the second image of Guru Shakyamuni Buddha. So if we can put that up, John. There he is. So there's quite a number of things to be said about this key image. I'm sure this image of Shakyamuni Buddha should be very familiar to everyone, but there's a few things about it that I'd like to point out. One is, you see up in the corner, there is a sun in the upper right and a moon in the upper left. These stand for the same qualities that the dorje and the bells stood for. The moon on the left stands for compassionate method, so that aspect of the path. And the sun, being an illuminator, stands for wisdom. And again, it's this union of compassionate method and insightful wisdom, which indicates the essence and the means of the Mahayana path to full enlightenment. Now, I had wanted to see if I could blow up one corner of this picture to show you something that may not be obvious on this size, but if you look very closely at what the Buddha is seated upon, well, first there's the lotus. Well, that's quite obvious, that's quite big. But can you see that on top of the lotus, there's the edge of two discs? The white disc on top is easier to see, but I'm not sure if anyone here can see the sun disk that's under it. Oh, who's helping me by pointing that out? Is that you, John?
Yes.
Oh, great, thank you. I don't have the ability to do that from where I am. Yeah, so I was going to blow that up, so then you can actually see it's two discs on top of each other. So this is a specially prepared seat for not only the Buddha, but all of the various meditational deities in Vajrayana Buddhism. There is some variation, but this shows the what we might call the complete setup. So it has three parts to it. So it's the lotus, sun, and moon seed. The lotus, sun, and the moon. And again, each one of these has specific meaning. Actually, maybe I'll check to see if anyone here knows the answer to this. In this context, what does the lotus, especially in the context of being the seed of the Buddha, the lotus of the lotus, sun, and moon seed, what does the lotus stand for? And anyone who wants to raise their hand or answer, I think there's a way of raising your hand in the one of the functions on the bottom.
I'm not raising my hand, John, but I
Yeah.
have a I don't know for sure, but I always
Please.
think of the lotus as coming up out of the muck. So I'm thinking it's the Dharma, but I don't know.
Well, the reason why it's such a powerful symbol, and in fact, it's used to symbolize many, many different things, is exactly what you pointed out. It's the way the lotus grows, which is significant. It always grows in kind of muddy, swampy areas. And if you go through the countryside in India, you often see, kind of a ditch with a lot of mud in it. But growing out of it is this beautiful, immaculate lotus, because the way it grows, it opens up after it's reached the surface. And so even though it grows out of mud, it is unstained by the mud. And so the lotus can be used in different contexts to stand for many things. It can be used to just simply refer to the bodhisattva, the person who's striving for enlightenment on behalf of others, that the bodhisattva's love and compassion in his or her interest in being of benefit to other allows the bodhisattva to be in the world, but not to be stained by the delusions of the world. And so the lotus becomes an indication of the way in which the bodhisattva is in the world, but not of the world. And in some contexts, there's certain contexts, and we might get to this later, in which the lotus stands for wisdom. And maybe I'll have a chance to explain that. But in this context here, the lotus stands for something which is often translated as renunciation. Renunciation, which is the first of the three principal aspects of the path to enlightenment. Those three are renunciation, and then the bodhicitta motivation, the compassionate bodhicitta motivation, and then the wisdom, specifically the wisdom of shunyata, of emptiness, of ultimate nature. And many of you probably have received teachings either in person or remotely about these three principal aspects of the path, because this is something which is very, very often taught by all the different teachers. And the Jade Tsongkhapa wrote a special text called The Three Principal Aspects of the Path. So I indicated very briefly that renunciation is the name for that first aspect, the one that's represented by the lotus here. But I also indicated that that's a misleading translation. Does anyone have an idea why? Well, then let me ask you another question. What does renunciation bring up to your mind? Like, if you were to renounce something, what would that be, and why would you renounce it?
I maybe renouncing worldly, what's the word? Worldly,
Preoccupations?
yeah, preoccupation.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. Often, I'm not a scholar in Tibetan or in Sanskrit, but I've been told that the Tibetan word for renunciation, nejung, means definite emergence. It means the definite um, decision, the very conscious decision to leave the ordinary, troubled, samsaric existence behind. Mhm. But the problem, and specifically what it refers to, is to gain a state of mind in which all the various defilements and delusions have been overcome. Because the uh, because it's the attachment to these worldly sense objects, the sensory objects of desire, and to our limited concept of what makes us happy. It's that which is kind of the main preoccupation of the vast majority of beings on this planet, human and non-human alike. You know, we're constantly running after these sensory objects of desire. It's sort of like a bull with a ring in its nose being led by the attachment to these objects. So what are these objects? All the various sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tangible sensations. And we're continually, while we're still at the level of an ordinary worldly being, we're constantly preoccupied in trying to get as many pleasant sights, pleasant sounds, pleasant tactile sensations, and so forth, and avoiding the opposite. So if we touch something that's very smooth and nice, we feel happy for a moment. And then if we touch something that's kind of rough and prickly, then we feel unhappy. And our whole life, to a very large extent, becomes trying to have as many of these pleasant experiences and avoid as many of the unpleasant experiences. Well, on the face of it, that sounds kind of logical. You know, what we'd certainly prefer to have a pleasant experience rather than an unpleasant one. But there's a huge drawback in this. You have a feeling what that drawback might be? Is it satisfying? Is it
No, only temporarily.
That's exactly right. Yeah, right. No one is denying that, like I happen to like vanilla ice cream a lot. So the first lick or two of a vanilla ice cream cone is really pleasurable and I feel happy, right? But as soon as I continue, what happens is as I go on, the amount of pleasure I get from it decreases. And actually, a lot of times, if I continue long enough, what was pleasurable turns to pain. You know, upset stomach, you know, and after a while, I don't even want to look at the ice cream anymore, right? So this is true. I mean, oh, by the way, if I ever again say this is true, it's not to be believed that it's true simply because someone like me said it. It's not even meant to be accepted that it's true if someone like Lama Yeshe, Kabche Zopa Rinpoche, or the Buddha said it. Because as Buddha said when he gave his teachings, no one should accept the teachings just out of faith, just out of blind belief, but they are to be tested, because it's only with that that we can actually own the teachings, that we can put it into practice. Otherwise, our spiritual practice is on a very, very thin basis of blind faith. And as the Dalai Lama always emphasizes, the Buddhist path is meant to be a path of engaging our intellect, our reasoning, our logic, our experience, and then testing for ourselves to see if the teachings are real. Only in that way can we own the teachings from the inside. So I'm starting to say, that it's true that these sensory objects of desire are able to give us moments of pleasure, moments of brief happiness, but after a while, they either lose their ability to give happiness or they turn into their opposite and become the source of pain. So that's not something to be believed because someone else tells us that. We actually have to check from our own experience if it's true or not. There are certain instances where this syndrome is so strong and so powerful and so warped that pretty much anyone can see that it's true. That is addiction to some kind of substance, a drug or alcohol, or in some cases, even other things which aren't normally thought of as addictive qualities. If we become addicted to these, it's like we're putting all our eggs in the basket of that pleasure that we're getting from that substance. But as anyone who's ever been hooked on a drug or alcohol will say, that the amount of pleasure that you get from the substances is very brief and very quickly leads to its opposite, and to addiction, ill health, and eventually to death. So in those cases, those extreme cases, which unfortunately there's so many examples of it, you just have to, watch the news or read the newspaper, and it's there in front of us, or walk through any city or even country, and you see how many people are strung out on drugs, that attachment to that fake source of happiness and pleasure is responsible for so much suffering. Now, one of the things that the Buddha pointed out, and that the lamas are always trying to reinforce the understanding of, is that it is not the sensory object itself which is the problem. Like, there's nothing wrong with surrounding oneself to beautiful, pleasant-looking visual objects, or to listening to nice, sweet music, or eating delicious, wholesome food, or surrounding oneself with odors which are pleasant to the nose, or being in contact with fabric and other tangible objects which is pleasant to the touch. The problem isn't in the object. The problem is in the overestimating view we have that these objects are able to give us more than just temporary pleasure. There was an old saying, I haven't heard it in the last 30 or 40 years or so, but when I was younger, I used to hear it. They say, some people eat to live, but other people live to eat. In other words, food, so the object of the taste of object of taste and object of touch, and something that's meant to support our body. Food is a necessity to keep us alive. So we eat in order to live. But if we get addicted, or we overestimate the happiness that food can give us, then it's as if we're living in order to eat. We're not eating in order to live. we're living in order to eat. And that's a very, very different attitude, isn't it? Because people who live, who the whole purpose of their life is to gather as many pleasurable sensory experiences and avoid as many unpleasant sensory experiences, that's that doesn't lead to happiness. It gives us momentary experiences of pleasure. But if that is the scope of our, let's say, our practice, our spiritual practice, if spiritual practice is meant to give us happiness, if it stays on the level of just running after sensory objects of desire, then that's going to be a very, very bad path for us. Because if the more we indulge in that, the more unhappy we become. So when the Buddha taught, right from the very beginning, he stressed the importance of the middle way. So when it comes to food, we shouldn't be overindulgent in it, and then end up out of shape, I should speak, out of shape, and very often ill because of our eating habits. But we also shouldn't starve ourselves. We have to eat enough to maintain the body, but not so much that we become dependent on that for our ultimate source of happiness and well-being, because it and all the other sensory objects are incapable of giving us that happiness. Before he manifested full enlightenment, the Buddha spent 6 years in a fasting retreat, because previous to that, he was a prince in a very, very well-appointed palace that his father had built him. And he had all kinds of sensual delights at his fingertips. But eventually, when he had visions of sickness, old age, and death, he realized that that way of living the life was a dead end. So he decided to leave the palace and become a homeless wanderer for the truth, for the path that really leads to the deliverance from dissatisfaction and suffering. And so he spent 6 years basically starving himself. And after 6 years, he asked himself, am I any closer to the goal of freedom from suffering and dissatisfaction than I was when I began this 6-year fast? And he realized that he was not only no closer to his goal, even though he had practiced so strictly for so many years, but he was actually, in a sense, further away from it, because now his body was in a weakened state. And in that weakened state, he couldn't meditate clearly. So that's the point in which a very dramatic event happened in the life of Buddha. He was offered a nutritious meal of milk rice by the wife of a herdsman who lived in that area. And eating this food, his strength and his health returned. And he said to her, her name was Sujata, he said, Sujata, you thought I was some kind of special being. No, I'm just a regular human being like everyone else. But with the meal that you've given me, now I know that I'll have the strength to win the path to end suffering and achieve enlightenment. And indeed, after that, he took his seat under the tree of enlightenment, the Bodhi tree, in what's now Bodh Gaya, and achieved enlightenment within a very short period of time. So after the Buddha had achieved that awakening, he wanted to share what he had seen with those who were capable of benefiting from it. So he realized that the other 5 people that he had shared that 6-year fast with, they would be very qualified. They would be ready to understand and follow what he had discovered. But But he realized as well that those 5 companions had left him. They had deserted him. Does anybody know this story well enough to know why these 5 had spent those 6 years with this Siddhartha, the name of the Buddha before he became enlightened? Why he spent those 6 years with him and then left? Were they interested in just seeing another part of India? They were like on a tour or something? Has to be a better reason than that.
I kind of,
Tell us.
Oh, Mary, you have your hand up, but you still muted yourself. Yes, Mary.
well, maybe they thought he was going to die, or they thought, well, this isn't for me, wasting away and so forth.
No, that's an interesting answer, but no. In fact, that might have been why they thought that he might have stopped eating for those 6 years. But they were gung-ho to follow him and practice with him. He was their leader, acclaimed leader. Anybody have an idea?
Yes, I don't know.
Yes,
I
Yolanda?
think that they didn't trust him anymore because he took the food and
Yes.
abandoned the tradition of asceticism. Extreme.
Exactly. They thought, see, before that, the reason they were with him was because he was such a powerful practitioner. Everything he did was so correct and so strong, and his ability to fast was so extraordinary, and his discipline was so extraordinary. So they thought, well, if anybody is going to achieve enlightenment through this path, it's going to be this guy Siddhartha, it's ex-prince Siddhartha. And so that's why they stayed with him. But when they saw him take food, because before that, the only thing that he would eat for those 6 years was the berries and so forth that just happened to land on his lap or in his hand as he sat in this forest. Other than that, he wasn't taking proper food at all. But now they saw that he was taking really nutritious food, and perhaps even worse than that, he was taking it from a woman. I mean, my goodness, that's a sign he's really given up now. He's hanging out with women. So anyway, for those reasons, but especially for the fact that they thought he had been giving up his discipline, and they felt that his presence was contaminating that meditation area, that place near a river where the 6 of them had the 5 companions and Siddhartha had spent all those 6 years. They thought, well, he's quit, so we can't stay with him anymore. So they decided, well, there's another place. It's not far from the holy city of Varanasi, or Benares, as it's known in the West. And outside of that, there's a place called Sarnath. And in Sarnath, there is an animal park, and a lot of meditators like to go there. That's a good place for meditational retreat. So they decided, we'll go there. So they left. They left thinking that Siddhartha had abandoned the spiritual path. So later, when Siddhartha took the milk rice, became rejuvenated from that nutrition, and with determination took his seat under the Bodhi tree, and then in the space of just one night achieved the full enlightenment that he had been looking for all those many years. And he checked to see who would be the first people who would be ready to understand and appreciate what I've experienced so they could experience themselves. His thought immediately went to those 5 former companions because he knew they were very serious. They were so serious, they left when they thought he had quit, right? Now, I should add, these were not the first people that he thought to teach. The first people he thought to teach were the 2 teachers he himself had studied with before he began this 6-year fast. And from these 2 teachers, he learned very, very deep levels of meditative absorption, and he mastered them. But he realized, well, meditation absorption isn't enough. That doesn't give a final cessation of suffering. While one is in that absorption, it's like being in deep sleep. But when you wake up from it, you haven't removed the deep causes of suffering, and therefore it comes back again. So even though what the teachers taught him was extremely valuable and very important, it was not the full path to the enlightenment he was seeking. So then when he finally did experience the enlightenment he was seeking, he realized, well, those teachers would have been the best people for me to teach. They themselves were very spiritual and great teachers in their own right, but he also realized with his enlightened consciousness that those 2 teachers had passed away. So he couldn't reach them to teach them. But he also realized that his 5 former companions were in the deer park at Sarnath. He was able to see those with his clairvoyance. And so he made his way to Sarnath. And when he arrived there, the other 5 saw him coming. And they said to one another, oh, here's that quitter Siddhartha again. Let's give him the cold shoulder. Let's not even greet him. Right? So that was their intention. But as he walked closer, they saw a huge change had come under their former companion. This was even before he said anything. Just his bearing, the way he walked, the way he held himself, the look in his eye. And so as he approached, despite their intention not to even greet him, they made him welcome. They made a cushion for him to sit on. They had some water for him to wash out his mouth and wash off his feet. And they asked him to sit down and then to teach what he had obviously experienced because he was so transformed. And so there it was in the deer park in Sarnath, just a number of weeks after his attainment of full enlightenment, that the Buddha gave his first teaching, known as the turning of the wheel of Dharma. Dharma is the teaching. Turning the wheel means putting it into motion in the world. And this is a very short sutra, a short discourse, but in it he laid the foundation for the remaining of 45 years of his life and the teachings he was to give during that period of time. The first thing he told them was to follow a middle path, to avoid sensory indulgence, which is the path that he had followed before he left the palaces of his father, or separate, and the other extreme, to avoid deprivation, because that leads to weakness. So the sutra begins with his admonition to those followers to follow the middle path. Then after that, then he gave the heart of the teaching and the foundation for all the rest of the teachings he was to give in that life and also in future states of existence. That essence of the Buddhist teachings that he gave right on the very first discourse is known as the four something. The four what? If any of you have studied or even heard of Buddhism for more than 1 week and you don't know the answer to this question, stand in the corner.
Four Noble Truths.
We know the answer.
Oh, good. Thank goodness.
Or the Four Noble Truths.
No, it's not the
Four
four
Noble
major.
Truths. The
Four Noble Truths.
Yeah, right. The
Four
four
Noble
noble truths.
Yeah.
And okay, I want 4 people to answer this next question. Each one of you give one answer and give it as briefly as you can. Even 1 word will do if you can do it. What was the first noble truth?
Truth of suffering.
Suffering, right? And by the way, here the word suffering in the original language was dukkha, which doesn't just mean obvious suffering. It just means dissatisfaction. You know, having a restless, dissatisfied mind, feeling there must be something more in life, but not knowing what it is. So suffering, dissatisfaction, uneasiness. He indicated this exists. That's the first noble truth. Now, before I ask the next 3 questions of you, that phrase, the four noble truths. So the first one is the noble truth of suffering. Does that mean that there's something noble about suffering? Is that what it means? I'll give you a hint. The answer to that question is no. That's not what it means. But it sounds like that, doesn't it? The four noble truths. What's
Yeah.
noble? The truth. And what's the truth of the first one is suffering. So therefore, it sounds like there's something noble about suffering. That is actually a mistranslation. But it's been used now for so many decades, if not centuries by now, that everyone uses it, even those people who know it's not exactly correct. Does anyone know what it should be instead of the four noble truths?
The four
Okay.
truths.
I didn't hear that.
I just said the four truths.
The four truths, yes, but the word noble is there.
Okay.
I think it
Actually,
was
noble.
taught to his advanced students. It was taught to the nobles, but I mean, not noblemen, but they were like high practitioners.
Yeah, yeah. They were what's known as Arya beings, Aryas. In the history of India, there was a race of beings called the Aryans who came from the north, who displaced the local inhabitants, the Dravidians. And when they set up the caste system, these Arya beings took the top positions, right? So to be an Arya being meant to be a noble person from that point of view. Now, Buddha taught that it's not your caste that makes you noble. You know, it's not your birth that makes you noble. It's what kind of heart you have, what kind of mind you have, what kind of person you are. But they continue to use the term Arya because it became a synonym for high, honorable, correct, exalted, right? So what the phrase should have been, instead of the four noble truths, it would be the 4 things, the 4 understandings, the 4 realizations that are seen as true by people who have achieved this Arya state. In other words, people who have become ennobled. How? By cultivating the wisdom to such an extent that they see ultimate reality directly. So anyone who achieves that, and this can be achieved before full enlightenment. It's a quality of enlightenment, but from that, you still have to progress and get used to that experience sufficiently to remove all the remaining defilements and misunderstanding, and then you become a liberated being, and then you become, a fully enlightened Buddha. But the Arya state is a very, very advanced state, to have that direct, non-conceptual realization of the ultimate nature of things, ultimate reality. If some of you may have received teachings on the 5 paths to enlightenment, the path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, and no more learning. If any of you have ever received teachings on that, you become an Arya being when you reach that 3rd state, the state of seeing, means seeing reality directly. Right? And at that point, you're no longer an ordinary being. You're not yet a fully enlightened being, but you crossed the biggest threshold to that experience. And when you do cross that threshold, then it is said that you see very clearly, with no hesitation, no confusion in your mind, that ordinary reality is in the nature of suffering. For all of the experiences of pleasure and temporary happiness that it has, it is ultimately unsatisfactory. It's dukkha, it's suffering. And an Arya being sees that directly, and also sees the second noble truth directly. And what was the second one? After the truth of suffering comes the truth of what?
The cause.
The cause. Yeah, the cause of suffering. So we tend to think, speaking on behalf of all other worldly unenlightened beings, we tend to assume that our happiness and well-being depends on external factors, as does our unhappiness. So if we were to surround ourselves with enough positive factors and avoid as many negative factors, then we would have the happiness we desire and we'd avoid the suffering we don't desire, right? But the second noble truth says the cause of suffering is not that. The cause of suffering, and even the cause of suffering, is not the sensory objects that we're addicted to. The cause of suffering is our attachment to these objects. So the cause of suffering is grasping attachment, desirous attachment. Later on, Buddha said more about this, but in the first teaching, the focus was on attachment being the cause of suffering and dissatisfaction, because it never gives us the satisfaction that we want, and only sets us up for more obvious forms of suffering. Okay, so those are the first 2 noble truths. One is that suffering exists, which is very easy to see, though the Buddha defined it very deeply. It wasn't just obvious experiences of displeasure. And then the second noble truth was the cause of that suffering, which was not external, but our internal attitude of grasping onto these unsatisfactory pleasures, thinking that they are the source of true happiness. Okay, so those are the first 2 noble truths. And I used to think, when I was first studying Buddhism, if people thought that Buddhism was about the first 2 noble truths, suffering and the cause of suffering, they would say, well, that's one religion I'm not going to have any interest in. Right? We could say, thank God he taught the 4 noble truths. If he'd only taught the 2 noble truths, that's really depressing, isn't it? The nature of reality is that we are dissatisfied, we suffer a lot, and the cause of suffering is inside us. Whoopee, I'll follow that religion. That sounds like a real bummer, right? But fortunately, he went on, because he was setting the stage for teaching the second 2 noble truths. So the third and the fourth. So does anyone remember what the third one is called?
Cessation of suffering.
I couldn't see who said it, but whoever said it, that was the right answer. The cessation or the end of suffering. And the Buddha was able to teach this from his own experience because he had experienced the liberation and enlightenment from which there was no recurring dissatisfaction or suffering. So the third noble truth, which can be seen if you achieve that Arya level, is that suffering can be completely eliminated because those beings who experience that level have experienced that liberation, that freedom. And then the fourth noble truth, what is that?
Path,
I sort of heard it, but not quite.
the path.
The path, yes, Eloise, the path. And I don't mean to be too strict with you. After all, I only know about 2 or 3 people in this group. The rest of you are complete strangers to me, and it's not nice to insult strangers the first time you meet them. But if you have an interest on any level of Buddhism and the Buddhist path, when someone walks up to you and says, what are the 4 noble truths? You should be able to answer like that, because that's the essence, you know. Like, it would be like not being able to answer that question, even without a full commentary on it, but just to even be able to give that answer, would be like someone who's a devout Christian, and you go up to the person and say, oh, I hear you're a devout Christian. Who do you worship? And if the person said, oh, who is it? What's that guy's name? Who is that? I mean, that would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? You should be able to learn that and remember that right from the beginning, because it's the essence, it's the heart of that religion. And the essence or the heart of the Buddhist religion, the foundation of it, is the 4 noble truths. So we should know those. And then on top of that, there are many other teachings which go into great detail on each of those truths. And that requires a study and memorization to get our mind around that. But at least we should know what the 4 are by name. Okay. So there was cessation of suffering, and then the last one, the 4th one, what was that called? Anyone?
The path.
The path. The path leading to, not only is there a cessation, but there is a well understood path that leads to that liberation. And that's the eightfold path, the eightfold path. And I'm not going to go into any detail on that one now, except when we think, you know, this is this is meant to be about symbols, and I haven't really said very much about symbols up to this point. So next week we're going to have a lot to cover. But just as, let's take Christianity as an example again, the symbol of Christianity is a cross, right? And the symbol of Judaism is a double triangle, right? And this symbol of Islam is a crescent moon. So do you know what the symbol of Buddhism is? Sometimes you see it in a painting or on a statue on top of a Buddhist temple or monastery.
Would it be the wisdom eye?
The wisdom eye, that's a good guess, but that's not the, because it does stand for the wisdom of the Buddha, but the actual Buddhism in terms of an actual path,
Is it the wheel?
you know? I'm sorry?
Is it the wheel?
The wheel, yes, that's the answer. It's the 8-spoked wheel. Have you seen that? And sometimes, like in the Tibetan tradition, it's flanked by 2 deer, a male and a female deer. The deer, I believe, goes back to the deer park at which the Buddha started turning the wheel of Dharma, right? So the deer represent on at least one level that, you know, where that teaching was first given. And the 8 spokes is the noble eightfold path leading to the cessation of suffering. Okay. In the Tibetan tradition, not just in the Tibetan tradition, but it's very strong there, they spend more time not talking about the Eightfold Path, but the way the Eightfold Path can be abbreviated into the 3 higher trainings. There's some aspects of that path that fit into one training, the training in moral self-discipline. There's other aspects that fit into the training of concentration. And then there's some elements that fit into the aspect of the training of wisdom. So instead of having to memorize 8 words, which I used to find very difficult and still do occasionally, it's much easier to remember those 3: moral discipline, concentration, and wisdom. And then on that basis, then you can elaborate to the Eightfold Path. So that's what the Buddha taught in that very first teaching. And as I indicated, it became the basis for every other teaching he was ever to give, and as elaborated by his followers as well, the Eightfold Path. And let's see, where are we? We have a little bit less than a half an hour. I'm just trying to think how to use this time. If anyone here needs a break just to stand or stretch, you can take a minute or so to do that now. And then when we come back, I'd like to talk about the essence of that's revealed in the path to enlightenment on the basis of these 4 Noble Truths. So if you feel the need for standing and stretch, I just feel the need to have a spoonful of food, which I have next to me. Okay, so if you feel up for it and are ready, we can start again. I saw there was a message. Someone put a message up, and I only read the first 2 words before it disappeared. And it was a request for prayers. If that was you and you want to make a request for that to the group, please do so, but I don't see the message anymore.
You need to go to chat, Don. Under chat, it will open a window, and it was Willis Blackmore asking for prayers for Patty, who's struggling with pneumonia.
Oh, I see it. Okay. So that's for Patty.
Mhm.
John, generally at the end of a class, we make dedications, people put in names and we have
Okay.
a list of people and we can, I've added Patty to the list and we can definitely
Oh,
read that,
wonderful.
hopefully read that list at the end.
Maybe this is a little out of order, but earlier today, I received these are emails I get every day from the FPMT. They send it to must be hundreds of people, and in this last one, they mentioned that some of you have heard of this wonderful Tibetan woman known as Khandrola, who our teacher, Kepche Zopa Rinpoche, has much faith in her, and he often calls her his doctor because she oversees things like his health and many other related matters. And every year, offerings are made on behalf of the FPMT to Khandrola to see if there's any possible interferences to the life of Kepche Zopa Rinpoche. And often Khandrola will suggest different practices that might be done. And I don't know the wording of what she said, but apparently she indicated that there is some obstacles coming up for Kepche Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Zopa. And in addition to the kinds of practices we would do in any case when our teachers are showing an indication that there's obstacles, she specifically recommended that we recite the 4-line prayer that combines refuge with bodhicitta. I think everyone here knows that one. In fact, probably a lot of people know it both in English and in Tibetan because it's always repeated. It's the one, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest assembly, by the virtuous merit that I collect by practicing giving or by listening to the teachings or by engaging in any other positive action. By that virtuous merit, may I attain the state of a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May I attain the state of a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May I attain the state of a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So the first lines are taking refuge in the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And the last line, there it goes. And the last line is, last 2 lines indicate the cultivation of this precious bodhicitta mind, where we're engaging in this path not simply to experience our own liberation from suffering, but so that we're in the best position to be able to benefit others. That's the compassionate bodhicitta motivation. So I had been thinking to start this class with that prayer, but there's so much packed into that prayer that I didn't want to just recite it and then move on. And I didn't want to divert myself and everyone here from the teaching on symbolism, which I was meant to be doing. So I followed a middle path of not doing anything. But since Khandrola just now said that I think I received that email yesterday, I believe, that practice, not just simply reciting the words of that prayer, but putting our mind in the state of taking refuge in the only source we have for reliable refuge, and that is the enlightened nature, the potentially enlightened nature of our own mind, and the actualized enlightened nature of the high being's mind, and the teachings of Dharma that they give, and then the people who make up the Sangha community of realized beings who are our best companions and our models on the path. So if we can keep that a very easy, very short, very profound prayer in mind, and then dedicate it to the removal of any obstacles that might be in the way of Khyentse Lama Zopa Rinpoche's long life, that would be excellent. And in that email, it's reported that Khandrila suggested that we do that kind of practice as much as we can, either individually or with other people, for the next 2 months. So then it's up to us how we arrange to do it, silently, out loud, with others, by ourselves, whichever way really touches our heart. That would be an excellent offering and a way to begin to repay at least a fraction of the extraordinary kindness we received from beings such as Lama Yeshe, Khyentse Zopa Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the others. Okay. I just derailed my train of thought. We were going to talk about something else just before I got onto that. Oh yes, the essence of the path to enlightenment, right? So the first teaching the Buddha gave was on the Four Noble Truths. But soon after that, he started giving more detailed more detailed information about these Four Noble Truths. And one set of teachings that were begun very, very shortly after the first sutra, and then continued for quite a bit of time afterwards, the main focus of his teachings is on what is known as the Wheel of Life. The Wheel of Life. The subtitle for the Wheel of Life is the 12 Links of Dependent Arising. Can I just see by raising your hand, how many people have heard something about the 12 links of dependent arising? 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like everybody's at least heard the title of that. Okay. Now, of course, that's a huge topic. I won't go into it other than looking at the very center of that Wheel of Life. So maybe, John, you can find that. That should be the next one. I think it's 2B. Or not to be. Okay. So there's the Buddha teaching at Sarnath. And then I think the very next one, I believe, there it is. That's the Wheel of Life. Now, I'm only showing the central portion of it. And there's a lot more other teachings related to it in the rest of the wheel. But in the center, we see 3 animals: a pig, a fowl, it could be a pigeon or a rooster, some kind of bird like that, and then a snake. And in this depiction, which is a version of it that His Holiness the Dalai Lama prefers, the 2 animals, I'll call it a pigeon in this case, the pigeon and the snake are coming out of the mouth of the pig. There's other depictions of the Wheel of Life in which the 3 are, pardon me, the 3 are forming a circle. So, you know, the tail of one is in the mouth of the other and they form a ring like that. In that version of it, those 3 are shown that way to show how they're interrelated. But the Dalai Lama says it's more profound to have a version like this, in which the bird and the snake come out of the mouth of the pig. So does anyone happen to know what the bird and the snake, the ones coming out of the mouth of the pig, what they symbolize, what they refer to? If you don't know, that's fine. But if you do know, and
desire and anger.
Desire and anger, right? Desirous attachment. That's the example of the bird. And one of the reasons, you know, this isn't meant to be like a a biology lesson, all of these are just symbolic. But the bird is a pretty good symbol of desirous attachment, especially when that bird is a rooster. You think of a rooster in a hen house, is, you know, really his life is governed by desirous attachment, right? And then the snake, I think that's a very, very widespread, nearly universal symbol for hatred or anger. Because the snake is sitting there hissing, just waiting to attack. Right? So there you have these two poisonous minds. The poisonous minds of desirous attachment means I've got to have it, right? And we were kind of referring to that earlier when we just talked about how desirous attachment makes us want certain things and get rid of other things, thinking that that's going to be the path to liberation and enlightenment. And then those things that we don't like, we want to ward off. And so that's fearful and angered repulsion, or the hatred symbolized by the hissing snake. Okay. So it's not difficult to see how those two poisonous states of mind, this desirous attachment on one hand, and fearful and angered repulsion, hatred on the other, how those two are responsible for so much of the suffering we see in the world, in our own personal life, and in the affairs between nations, in the behavior between animals and insects, right? But those two don't arise from nowhere. Right? They come into existence for a reason. And the picture symbolically shows them coming out of the mouth of a pig. So what do you think the pig symbolizes? And before you,
Ignorance. Oh, sorry.
no, I just wanted to add one level. Some people won't like this answer because I have friends who have pigs and they're apparently extremely intelligent animals. They live in the mud, but they're extremely intelligent animals. But in this case, the pig stands for, and now you can give the answer.
Ignorance.
Ignorance, right? So if you want to get upset by the teachings, there's a lot of things you can get upset at, but mostly it comes for taking the symbolism on a level that it's not meant to. This isn't a slur on all pigs. It's indicating that when people see a pig wallowing in the mud, and they look at it all dirty, a lot of people feel, oh, that's really ignorant behavior. Though for a pig, from the pig's point of view, it's pleasurable. Okay. So anyway, a pig, very correctly, symbolizes ignorance. Now, what kind of ignorance? Because we can be ignorant of all kinds of things. Anything we don't know, we can say we're ignorant of, without it being a slur. Like, for example, I've never studied languages like Serbo-Croatian. So I'm completely ignorant of Serbo-Croatian. But my ignorance of Serbo-Croatian is not the source of my suffering. It's not out of that my hatred, anger, jealousy, and all the other delusions arise. So what ignorance is the ignorance that is the source of these delusions, which are responsible for all our suffering? What do you think that might be?
Pleasure?
The reality of how things exist.
Yeah.
Wrong view.
Yeah. It's more that. It's like the Buddha said, we suffer needlessly because our view of reality is skewed. We not only don't see the way things do exist, but in its place, we have views which are the opposite, which are contrary, which is the way we think things exist. It's a misknowing. It's not only an unknowing of reality, but it's a misknowing of it. It's not only that we don't know what the source of, let's say, true happiness is. Not only are we ignorant of the source of true happiness, but we have a misunderstanding that certain things, such as my indulgence in vanilla ice cream, is a source of real happiness. So that's a double whammy of ignorance. It not only avoids what should be known or what needs to be known to get out of suffering, but in its place, it creates something which is not at all the main cause of our suffering. So it's the misunderstanding the nature of reality. And if we were to go back to the indication that this hub of the wheel of life is part of a larger teaching, that larger teaching is the 12 links of dependent origination. That first link is the link of ignorance. It's the link of this misknowing the nature of reality. And if we, this is a vast subject, but if we had to reduce it in a few into a few words, we could say that we have a mistaken view of ourselves and of other phenomena as well, that all of us, all these phenomena that make up the world, but especially our own self, exists as a concrete, separate, independent reality. Whereas in fact, nothing has that kind of concrete, separate, independent reality, or to use more technical language, nothing exists inherently. Or to use the language that Lama Zopa Rinpoche very often uses, nothing exists solely from its own side. So it's that ignorance, and especially when it's directed towards our notion of me, who I am. You know, oh, I can see that the outside world, the world of nature, is all interrelated, clouds and oceans. Yeah, I see that. That's interrelated. But me, I'm real. I'm me. You know, I'm my own person. And it's from that attitude that the bird of attachment and the snake of hatred arise. Because if something comes that we think, oh, I need that to provide my sense of self with security and a base, and I don't have it, so I need to go out and get it. Even it doesn't matter what action I do, I need it right now. You know, like the criminals in The Sopranos. You know, they'll go out and kill someone just to get you know, what sometimes they just wanted a carload of booze, and they'd kill people for that, right? That's real attachment. Right? And then if something happens that they don't like, then of course hatred arises, and then on the basis of that, then all manner of destructive actions take place. So that's at the center of the wheel of life, which begins the expanded understanding of what Buddha indicated in this first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the explanation of the Four Noble Truths. So we can think of the 12 links of dependent origination as a more detailed analysis of what goes into these Four Noble Truths. Let's check. Oh, I'm glad I checked, because we are now within a minute of stopping this class, and I know it's unfair to keep people longer than they expected. So I just wanted to mention that next week, for those of you who are brave enough, we're going to have the follow-up to this. And I'm going to make an attempt, I don't know whether I'll be any more successful next week than this week, but to give a bit more detail about the symbolism itself. One of the reasons I wanted to give more explanation is because the whole reason my friend Andy and I wrote the book, Images of Enlightenment, was because a lot of people wanted to know what Buddhist symbolism is about, because there's so many symbols. And there was very, very little that we could point them to, because even though some of the books had a lot of detail, it was very, very rare to see any indication of, well, how do you practice this stuff? Okay, this being has 12 hands, and in each hand is holding a different implement, and this stands for that, and that stands for the other, and the other stands for the other. Yeah, what do I do with that information? How do I practice that, right? And so what we tried to do was relate this symbolism actually to the method of practice that it's indicated to support. So that's that plus the fact that I talk a lot is the reason I went into so much detail. Next week, I'll try to get straight to the symbolism, but it will be impossible to avoid trying to indicate how that symbolism relates to the path. Okay. So if there has been any value in any of the things that we've said or thought, or any of the questions that have come up in our mind, if any of that has had any value, any purpose at all, then let us dedicate it the way that the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas always dedicate any positive energy generated by their virtuous actions. And that is so that all beings caught in the unsatisfactory cycle of samsara may find the happiness and freedom that they're looking for. So that all teachers, such as Khyentse Sopa Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and many others, not only from the Buddhist tradition, but in any tradition in the world which teaches love and kindness, compassion, may be endowed with long, fruitful lifetimes. Also, we can dedicate it so that we ourselves come under the benevolent care of such compassionate teachers in all our future states of existence, and so that the teachers themselves have a long life and we come under their care, and that we're able to, by doing this, to repay the infinite kindness we've received from each and every being. And then remember to dedicate that energy in whatever we might be doing, not only the rest of the day and this coming week, but in the coming months. So thinking about refuge and bodhicitta and dedicating it to the removal of any obstacles that may be interfering with the long life and health of our precious gurus. And is there anyone who represents Ksitigarbha, who had something that you might wanted to say at the end to bring this to a close? Because anything, Himane, or?
I think Eloise is going to read our dedication list.
Oh, great.
John maybe put some prayers up. I don't know.
No, I
Don't want prayer.
indicated that it wasn't need to do too much in the way of prayers this time.
Okay.
So our dedication list, first of all, for people suffering obstacles, Khyentse Lama Sopa Rinpoche, Sue and John, Randy and Jane, Jack and Vicky, Tariq and Tamara, Sonia, Joe, Matt and wife, Jamie K, Maya and sons, Nell and Brian, Adrian, Jane, Siri Khalsa, Jiwan Khalsa, Sarib Jat, Amanda, Deb, Bill, and all others, including trees and wildlife who have lost their homes to the fires and the many displaced by firefighting efforts.
Hmm.
Also, all those displaced by wars. Those who are, excuse me. go
I
ahead.
was just going to put Mary Jo on there. She didn't put her name, but I think we should put Mary Jo on there too.
Indeed, many of these names, John, are people who are suffering because of the fires.
Hmm.
For illness, we have John S., Betty K., Una the cat, Dutch, Siri Khalsa, Tom, Patty, and those who have recently died, venerable children. So thank you, John.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, everyone. And if any of you have suggestions or questions that you'd like to get to me before next week, you're very, very welcome to email them to me. My email address is a very, very simple one. It's just my complete name, Jonathan Landaw, @gmail.com. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
John, wonderful.
Thank you, John.
And thank you, John Bailey, also.
Yes, thank